We're going to try to close up this topical series we've been dealing with on love, the love of Christ, loving Christ. What love demands is love. And we're going to do that jumping off from this passage here. I'd like to start with this conclusion. One of the best gifts given to any Christian is the ability to be controlled by the love of Christ now. When it talks about a new life, living in a new life, that's not something we have to wait to cash in the golden ticket when we get to heaven. That is something that should affect how we live today. Now, saying that is one thing, but then that boils down into how do I do it and how can I make sure I'm always right? And Brother Ron, that gets even more complicated. So the idea that I don't have to make sure that I'm doing it right and I'm on top and I'm making every decision, that is so comforting. Understanding that it is possible for you and I to be controlled by the love of Christ is just freeing. It is the peace of God. It is the joy that comes when we are controlled. So that's what we're going to start to look at. I was going to do this to start with. I was going to make these little cards, put 5 little boxes on them, and hand them all out, but this takes too long, so we're going to do it this way. I think there are 5 ways to relate to this idea of the love of Christ. First box, you heard of the love of Christ. Well, if you're in Sunday school, in any church, that's an easy one. You sit right there, you check it. Maybe your mind goes back and you think, yes, I've heard. And then the next box would be, okay, I've heard, but do you believe? Because it's one thing to hear, it's another thing to believe. Yes, I believe. By the Holy Ghost. Has you received this? Well, you get a little nervous when you say receive, but then you think about it, and that's an easy one. You just, right? Boom, yes, I've heard, and I believed, and I've received, and I'm moving down this card. I look pretty good. Well, then next would be filled. Are you filled by the love of God? When I got to this one, this is what I would probably do. Who's looking? If nobody's looking, the pencil would kind of hover over there, but there's something in me that seems just a little arrogant to say filled, because I know the times that the man of flesh wins. But Paul would say, and he would write, and he would challenge us that we would know and be filled. And so, maybe we get to that point we say, yeah, yes, struggle and there's forgiveness, but overall I'm filled. And I love that picture of being filled. We're filled from the inside. That allows the fountain to overflow on the outside, and everyone who's around us can't help but get splashed on. And so a little of that love gets splashed out there, and we show forth the face of God. No man has seen God at any time. So we, therefore, are the ones who get to show his face, the love of God. But then it gets to the one, and that would be the 5th one on the card, and it all ascends as you would go down, because there's one even greater than being filled. And that comes from 2 Corinthians that we're going to look at here, and that is to be controlled, to be energized, to be motivated, to be moved. Today in now, if you say something like that, and I really wish we had time, I really would, although you have to be careful when you do things like this, because everybody gets answers. I'd like to know, Brother Ron, I think you and I could get together over the table and we could come up with a lot of good ways. How do you be controlled? What do you have to do to make this happen? I got to tell you, I grew up on a military base with a military dad, so I would come up with discipline. You have to be very disciplined, and I could make that sound very good. And I think you would probably come up with, you have to be great in faith, because you're a man of great faith. And we could just come up with this huge list. We're going to go to we're going to go to Corinthians 5, and Paul's going to tell us how these things happen. And they're surprisingly not the list that I would make up. And that's what I want to look at. Because, Brother Howard, I don't think there's anything greater for you and I than to live our life controlled by the love of Christ. So, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 14, for the love of Christ constraineth us. Okay, that really just means controls. Constrain, just think about what it sounds like. Constrain, one way. Push you into a gate, way to go. It us. It moves us. The love of Christ can control us. But then Paul writes this great word. Brother Moore, you and I don't have to figure out how this happens. For the love of Christ constraineth us because I would certainly mess it up. Because we thus judge. Now what he's about to do, and we're going to take another little time. We only have 2 points, so we should be able to get through. But we're going to stop right here. Get this wrong. Brother Ron, he's going to say, the law is constrained because, and then he says, because we judge. Because we run it through the thought process and we come out with a conclusion. You see, he's about to roll out the relationship between the heart and the head. And when you roll out that relationship, it's the head where it starts. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've heard, well, you know, I believed it in my head, but I just couldn't do it. Well, that's wrong. If I believe it in my head, I'll do it. The heart may be the desire center. It might be the motivating one. It might be the one that makes it happen. But what it makes happen is what I value, which comes right here. You know, Romans 1 and 2, by the renewing of the mind, it starts right here. When Christ was on the road to Emmaus and he begins to talk to him, he's talking to him, and they said, didn't our heart burn within us when he did what? When he taught us of the Scripture. Faith cometh by hearing, and how? It starts here. The battle is here. And oftentimes we just push off the thing, like, well, I know, but. No, there's a problem with our no. Our definition of no is not right. Because when we know, if I know, here, preacher, one of your greatest illustrations goes back like 15 years. It's where you stood right here and you said, this is poison, this is water. Believe this is poison, who will drink it? When we know it's bad, we don't do it. When we know it's nourishing, we will do it. The struggle is not here, it's here. We do whatever we desire and we think is important. The problem is here deciding what's important. That's why he writes this and he says, we judge. We have set on this principle as this is truth, and that is going to motivate what we do. You know, it's in this same book, if you go over to chapter 10, it's going to talk about the pulling down of strongholds. Howard, why does Bill, facetious Bill, yell and scream at his wife for 30 years? Why does his wife wait till he's not around and go have 3 glasses of wine every day to get by? Why does their daughter kind of things and lives in shame? Why? Well, it's here. That's why in chapter 10 it talks about the pulling down of strongholds, the thoughts, the imaginations. The battle's here. We're going to do exactly what we want. If I think that's the answer, that's what I do. So Paul would write here, and he starts with this idea. Oh, here we go. Proverbs 23:7. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Battery already. Eric, will you run up there and get me one? Because that's definitely the battery. Principle. Whatever grips your mind controls your heart. So with that principle being said, this is, here, let me do this. Brother Moyer, when I was growing up, I thought, this is what I thought. Now notice the beginning of the sentence, when I was growing up, I thought. Guess where it starts? This is what I thought. Growing up, I thought, I had a wife and then a couple kids. we studied and learned, and God blessed the parenting, and they grew up to be good kids, and I had a good job, and I was involved in a good church, that would make me successful. Well, most of those things I have, and I got to tell you, I'm still a mess. The problem is that's what I thought I was going to get my value from, and whenever I lean on those things, then I start to see the cracks in all of them. Maybe the job's not so good, maybe the house isn't so perfect. The wife is always good. Can't, she might watch this. But the value system of what I grew up thinking was good, well, Donnie, that's what I chased after. That's what my bullseye was. And is, okay, this is your bullseye. If you want to be controlled by the love of Christ, this is the bullseye. This is what you have to be aiming for. This is what you have to be trying to hit. Now he's going to, oh yeah. Jade, you got lucky. I don't have time to use your family as an illustration. Oh, I'm going to do it anyway. This week, well, now you know she was one of them. Preacher, this week I got to listen in on a family chat. Now this is a family chat about riots and unfairness and guns and equality. It just went all over the map. In this conversation, you had 2 people who were saved, and you had 5 people total. You had 1 on one side, 1 on the other side, 2 that were basically, let's find a way to all get along, and I won't tell you which one Jade was, and 1 that was just silent. So this goes back and forth and back and forth. I don't know. It sounded like it was hundreds of comments. I couldn't even keep up with them. Because when you got 5 people, jumping back and forth, and usually I'm not pro on all that stuff because you end up just lobbing grenades at each other, and the only thing that happens is people get blown up. But it was family, and they were handling it very well, and I actually kind of enjoyed it. And then 1 jumped in after not saying anything for an hour and said, well, nothing will fix this. What we need is Jesus. And I got to tell you, that's the right answer. But here's the problem. What effect do you think that had on that group of people? It had this one. Let me try to shut you up without being too demeaning, because what she gave was a conclusion. My conclusion doesn't change your mind. I've got to bring you from here to here. That's why we have to be ready to give an answer. When Paul showed up, on Mars Hill, he astounded them, bringing them from here to here, bringing them to a place of decision. Too often we're so happy just saying, here's the conclusion, you don't do it, too bad. But no, the battle is for the mind. It's how to get them from here to here. That's how we got from here to here. And that was the battle. And it was just such an obvious, Sherry, it was just such an illustration of how important it is, any chance we have, to expound on the Bible. Just to share it. If we have an opportunity to teach the Word of God and we don't put in the study, what a shame. An opportunity to change the mind and influence the heart, and we take it so callous. Anyway, so paints this picture. Now back to this passage, because we got to go through this first one really fast. The second one I got to spend some time on. That sounds bad. That's going to sound really bad, because this first one is all the gospel. For the love of Christ constraineth us, because we thus judge. We have come to the conclusion that this is fact in our life. And what he came to the conclusion of, that one died for all, then all were dead. And that he died for all, that they which live should not henceforth live unto themselves. 2 things right there. First, Jesus died in my place. And dying in my place, he changed forever the course of my death. If you look at me and the way my death has to end, the way that story is written, he changed forever how that could be. There's only 2 paths. And I'm not talking heaven or hell. Those will be conclusions at the end. There's 2 paths. There's condemnation or there's celebration. coming in contact with the great God. You're either going to be condemned or you're going to be joined in celebration. And trying to picture that, go through, looking around. Brother Hank, I'm trying to find a good illustration. And in trying to find a good illustration somewhere, I just went, good illustration. Paul already did this, Hebrews chapter 12. He gave us this illustration. Hebrews chapter 12, verse. Now this is chapter 19. It's talking about God showing up on the Mount of Sinai. And for ye are not come unto the mount that might be touched and that burned with fire, nor unto blackness and unto darkness and tempest. And he goes through, and what he's about to do, Brother Ron, what he's about to do is he's going to take them all the way back to this picture. Now the reason this picture is important for us this morning is because this picture is before the mediator. This picture is before the law, before the sacrifices, before everything was laid in place. It is coming in contact with God without the blood of Christ. And so, as he comes and he paints this picture, let's remember what it was. 1 million, 2 million people maybe around the outside of the mountain. So terrifying, we had to put up barriers so you could stay behind. In comes a cloud. It's 7,500, it's 1.5 miles tall. 1.5 miles up in the air, it's still scary. In fact, this passage tells us even Moses was scared. And in he comes, and it's the picture of what it is. It's terrifying to fall into the hands of the living God. Because he came, and it is the picture of power and might and judgment. If they even touched the bottom of the mountain, they would die. That's why they put up barriers. And then he goes on in this same passage, and this is the part I really like. This is the encouraging part, verse 22. But ye are come unto Mount Zion. We don't come to that mountain. You know, that scary place of condemnation? That's not for you and I. And unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to be an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven, and to God the judge of all, and to the spirit of just men made perfect, and to Jesus the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaketh better things than that of Abel. Condemnation, celebration. Paints this picture. Coming to the same mountain, it's going to be one of two ways. It's going to be power and awe and terror, or it's going to be the city of the New Jerusalem. It's going to be child. It's going to be coming to the home. There's only two ways this thing can go. Conclusion. Christ died to move me from this condemnation side to this celebration side. My death is forever changed. So, if I settle that I was here in celebration, shouldn't that bring some thankfulness? If I really think I was here, but I've never done all those things. And I know it's kind of true, but, well, that's why I said, if you judge this out, Brother Moore, if we really put ourselves in place with no hope, then the one who comes and does it all and takes us from there to there, shouldn't that put some joy and love in our heart? So he starts out and he says, boom, settle two things. And they will have you constrained by the love of Christ. They'll have you controlled by the love of Christ. The first one is Jesus did it. And we're not here anymore, we're here. Second one. And that he died for all, that they which should live should not henceforth live unto themselves. Sherry, he didn't just change my death for forever. He changed my life. He changed my life so that I no longer have to live for myself. Now, in our time, Treva, in our time, that sounds silly. If you said this to a class, those kids would say, what's wrong with living for yourself? In fact, if you say it outside of a church, for sure. My mom does, my dad does. In fact, may not know my dad. My mom, somebody has to take care of me. We live in a society that pushes, you must take care of yourself. Every song, every show, every movie. It is the underlying, there's nothing wrong with taking care of you first. If we're not careful, we'll give that same counsel. But he came that we no longer have to live for self. The default of every person ever born is to live for themselves. Christ makes it possible to not do that. I told you when I tape it, it means it's not me. This just says it faster than I would. One of the barriers that holds many people back from knowing and being filled with and being controlled by the love of Christ is the idea that true happiness can only be found if I am free to live for myself. That is our generation. Living for yourself is the default life of every person. This means that unless something drastic happens to bring change, we will end up living for ourselves. By the way, this is what Paul would write in Philippians when he would say, all seek their own. None seek the things of Christ. Here's what's wrong with living for self. Eric, come on, smart boy. Here you go. Living for self. Want to know what the problem is? Oh, I need a book. I just like props. When I'm making things up, it helps me think. Eric, living for himself. Well, Eric wants to be the boss. But, preacher, if he's the boss and he wants anything done, guess who has to do it? He's living for himself. Eric has to do it. Now he's both the boss and the servant. You understand? You want more done? Guess who has to do it? You know what this guy over here is going to be doing? A boss, he's too demanding. Eric, the boss. That servant, he's too lazy. How does this work out any way other than frustrating? Sooner or later, Eric, the boss, starts beating up on Eric, the servant, because he doesn't get enough done, because life isn't good enough, because you haven't accomplished enough, because there's too many problems. Eric, the boss, starts to beat up look, you're unhappy? Think about this. Great logic, ready? You're unhappy, so you beat up you. That makes you happy? No, that makes you depressed. Welcome to the product of our modern day generation. So, in your depression, what do? Ron, you go and get some counsel. Maybe you pay for counsel. Maybe you watch Dr. Phil. Maybe you go and talk to a friend. By the way, be careful talking to a friend. Because if you're living for yourself, the only way you can have a friend is if they tell you what you want to hear. You're going to run around all the time asking them, do you love me? Are we okay? Is this what you want? Is this what you like? But anytime they disagree, get ready for a huge argument. Because all they're doing is protecting self. So, you get some counsel. You know what that counsel is going to tell you? Pretty obvious. Eric, the boss, you're too hard on yourself. You need to give yourself a break. Okay, you convinced me. I'll give myself a break. Now, Eric the servant is happy, but Eric the boss is furious. How does this work? It is a no-win. Living for self is the dumbest thing. When things get hard, what happens? After you've beat up on and then you've given yourself a break and it doesn't work, you know what you got to do? Life still stinks. So it's got to be everybody's fault. So we beat up on kid, we beat up on spouse, we beat up on family, we beat up on job. Welcome to the recipe for being depressed and alone. Or known as our generation. But good news. He came that not only he would change our death forever, but that he could change our life. Let me show you. Contrast being alone to well done, thou good and faithful servant. Remember last week? We were created to be in that cycle. You know, the cycle before the world was, where God the Father and God the Son, there was love. There was giving and receiving. There was perfect love. We were created in that same cycle for perfect love, to be in that giving and receiving. If we're just trying to give and give and give, who are we getting it from? It will never work. But he came to say, I want to bring you back and restore you to what you were created for, to your purpose, to give and receive love, to live in this cycle with the Father and the Son and the Spirit, the Trinity, God, to fellowship with us. However tough we think it's down here, we're receiving love up here. And when we receive that love, you know what we can't help but give? We give it right back. Remember that filled thing? From the inside, overflowing and touching everybody? I'm not talking about, I come to church, I got to be a Christian, let me walk around and put the fake smile on. Preacher will tell you, I really stink at the fake smile. I think I've studied church history just so I can give you this answer when you tell me to put on the fake smile. Some great leaders of the church were not known for their fake smile. In fact, the more burdens you are attuned to, the more burdens you see and try to help, the harder it is to put on the fake smile. But the more dependent you become on Christ, and the more that love flows this way, and you want to give it back, and your dependence becomes here and not so much here, and then life just changes. Natural life is to live for self. That will cause us to end in a death that yields condemnation. But he has come and changed all of that. And as this fact begins to rewire our thinking, it will fire up our hearts. How about that? Give us hot hearts. I've already changed that thing once. It changes everything. There was I don't know where I heard this illustration. I've heard it since I was a kid. And I've heard it a couple times. It's been changed every time. So true story, not true story, I don't know. I know it's an illustration and it fits right here. There's an old story about an Indian who goes into town. And it's 1900s is where the time was set when I first heard it. And he goes into town, and everywhere he goes, he's talking about Jesus. Oh, thank Jesus that you gave me my flower, and oh, bless Jesus for this and Jesus for that. And Lorraine, it's just every word comes out of his mouth is Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And finally, an old cowpoke gets tired of it, and he catches him one time coming out of the store, and he just does this. Why do you make so much of Jesus? Church is down there, and I know people go down there, and they're good people and all that, but why is Jesus everything? Old Indian doesn't speak very well, but he understands this is a very important moment. So he looks down on the ground, and he sees a worm just moving around. Rain, nastiness, street, boom, that's what happens. Worm, middle of the street. He sees a worm, sees some leaves over on the side. So he takes the leaves from over and around the side, and he puts them in a circle around the worm. Lights a fire. I don't know how he lights a fire. That's why I told you it's an illustration. I don't know how it happens. But as like a 12-year-old boy, it's stuck in my heart. So Donnie, he lights the leaves on fire, just in one spot. And as the fire begins to go around the leaves, and it catches from one to the other, you know what the worm does. As soon as he feels the heat on this side, he starts to move away, continues to move around. He moves away. Then that's a complete circle. Worm just goes to the middle of the circle and curls up, gets ready to die. Oh, the Indian reaches down, lifts up the worm, holds it in his hand, brings it to his heart, and says, I was the worm. And hell's fire was going to surround me. But he reached down and scooped me up. And that is why it's all about Jesus. He changes life and he changes death. Now, I must get this far. But I do want to bring up just 3 words. And we'll close with these 3 words. I don't want you to miss them. The first one is Jesus. Because it's Jesus who died. It's Jesus who rose. It's Jesus who we're supposed to live for when we no longer live for self. You know, and when I begin to think about this, I think about the rich young ruler. The rich young ruler was moral, he was religious, and he had everything in this world. So why not think I want everything in the next world too? That's how I picture him. So he goes to the rabbi, and he says, basically, with nice, smooth words, in his religious and moral way, what do I need to get that too? And when he responds that what you're holding on to, you have to let go of, that it has to all be about me, he walks away disheartened. I think that sticks in here because I've been in church and around church as long as I can remember anything. So I have spent most of my life around moral and religious people. I've come to understand that moral and religious people have missed out on the power to break the cycle of living for self. That rich young ruler, in all of his morality, and all of his self-sacrificing religious attributes, when looking at Jesus, turned around and walked the other way disheartened. And when we look at something like this, settle in the heart, because the mind decides, I need to walk toward Jesus. Every day, step by step, you know, 1 John, right? He'll light the way. Well, he doesn't light the 5 years down the road. He lights one step. You take that one step, and tomorrow he lights another step. And 5 years down the road, you look back and the whole path has been lighted. But you didn't see it to begin with. Must step towards, commit to, be around, think upon Jesus. The other thing that sticks out here is in verse 15, and that he died for all, that they which live should not henceforth. And that's talking about not henceforth, that's now. Okay, when he's saying this, he's saying that from the minute you read this, your life should be different. This is not something you wait for. This is not something that happens down the road. Again, this isn't something that happens when you're 18 or when you get your first car or when you're married or when you have a family. This is the way of your life now. Henceforth, commitment set in the head. And then last, all of this, or that, for God so loved the world, I can't tell you how young I was that I would have understood the knowledge that God loved the world. Sherry, I can't tell you. I mean, 8 years old, I was trying to tell people. I would have been that lady on the chat if there was chats. You need Jesus because Jesus loves you. Say, I wouldn't have stopped at you need Jesus. I'd have to be more wordy than that. I've known that all my life, Brother Ron. But I never knew that until I was broken and looked at myself as unlovable, with no hope. And then I knew that he loved me because he looked at me with all hope and all potential and all value, and gave up everything to spend eternity with me. Now, it is Jesus we run to. It is now we do it. And we are motivated because he loved us. We can't. Brother Hank, you close in a word of prayer this morning.